The following is an installment of Backtracking, a pop culture journey by Carlo DiSalvo.
And this is part of his ongoing audio, video, and literary series where he explores pop culture from a very specific Generation X perspective.
And today's deep dive is focusing on his piece, A History of Kids' Afternoon Television Before He-Man and the Transformers Edition.
All right, welcome back, everybody. It is so good to have you here as we dive back into the amazing world of after-school TV in that golden era right before He-Man and Transformers came along and, well, changed everything. So we started with that feeling, right? That sacred after-school ritual of just dropping your bag and planting yourself in front of the TV. From there, we went way back to the early days of kids programming. You know, the old sitcom reruns and those awesome local heroes, the captains who were on the air in so many cities. Then things got really interesting with the rise of syndication. We saw how absolute giants like Hanna-Barbera and the Kroft brothers basically rewrote the rules and got their shows in front of kids everywhere. And we finished up with some of the true cartoon classics, like the goofy antics of Deputy Dog and, of course, the one and only Rocky and Bullwinkle. Everything we have talked about up to this very moment, think of it as just the warm-up act, the opening credits. Because you know what? It was all just the preamble.
You know, sometimes a project starts out super simple, and then it just kind of explodes. That's pretty much what happened here. So this time, we're doing something a little different.
This is a special introduction to what's turned into, well, a surprisingly complex and totally fascinating multi-part series. I started out on what I thought was a pretty straightforward pop culture journey, but one topic just pulled me in so deep that it needed its own roadmap. So let's just start at the beginning of how this whole thing got so out of hand.
So this is officially part 5 of our series on after-school TV before He-Man. But I have to be honest with you, this is not the part 5 I thought I was going to make. I thought I was going to breeze through this project. I mean, aren't those the famous last words for just about any passion project? But that one simple assumption, well, it was the launching pad for something way, way more complex. So let me tell you what the plan was. The goal was super straightforward. I just wanted to cover the cartoons a kid like me would have watched on a weekday afternoon. We're talking about that very specific slice of time, right before shows like He-Man and Transformers came in, and this completely changed the game. This whole series was supposed to be a simple trip down memory lane. Just a nice, nostalgic look back at a very specific time in television. That era before the big, flashy cartoons designed to sell toys completely took over. Honestly, it was supposed to be easy. And this right here, this is the time frame we're anchoring in. We're talking 1979 to 1983. For me, I was everything from Montessori school through 3rd grade. It's a really personal, really formative time for any Gen X kid, you know? The original goal was just to capture that feeling, that sense of relief coming home, dropping your backpack and just melting in front of the TV. It was a daily refuge, especially for an introverted kid. The plan was to cover all the staples, old black and white sitcoms, Saturday morning reruns, and of course, the absolute foundation of afternoon TV, those old theatrical cartoons. And for a while, everything was going perfectly. The first 4 parts of the series, a total breeze, smooth, nostalgic, exactly as planned. But then I hit part 5, the section that was supposed to cover those theatrical cartoons, and that, my friends, is where this whole simple plan just went completely off the rails.
It all boiled down to this one single question. A question that seems so simple on the surface, but ended up changing everything. How do you properly handle the history of theatrical cartoons? It sounds easy enough, right? Well, it was anything but.
So the first thought was, okay, let's just lump all the animation studios into one part. Easy. But that just didn't feel right. So, plan B. Give the heavy hitters, MGM and Paramount, their own dedicated sections. That was better, but still a little messy. That led to an even bigger revision, splitting the deep dive history of the studios themselves from the story of how their cartoons were actually packaged and aired on TV. The project was already starting to expand. But even with that new structure, one specific studio just started to take over. It just kept getting bigger, more complex, and demanding way more attention than all the others combined. I think you can guess which studio that was. Warner Bros. The sheer depth, the tangled history, and just the massive volume of their classic cartoons made it impossible to just breeze past them. Researching Warner Bros. Cartoons wasn't just collecting a few facts anymore. It was like falling down a rabbit hole, which is pretty fitting now that I think about it. What started as one small piece of the puzzle became this massive, all-consuming deep dive. But it was more than just a deep rabbit hole. It was a rabbit hole with false bottoms. Every time I thought I'd finally hit solid ground and figured it all out, whoosh, the floor would just drop out, revealing an even deeper, more complex layer of history to explore. Researching Warner Bros. Is like digging through a magician's trunk. Every single time you think you've hit the bottom, a trapdoor opens, and you find a whole new, deeper layer of history and weird connections you never saw coming. This really gets to the heart of the problem. What I thought I knew was pretty basic stuff. You know, the main characters, some of the famous shorts. But what I discovered, whoa, it was a tangled web of contradictory facts, obscure histories I'd never heard of, and just countless loose threads that all needed to be pulled.
It turned into this crazy cycle. It was maddening, but I have to admit, it was also fascinating. You'd pull on one tiny little thread, hoping to get an answer, and instead, you just unravel 10 more questions you didn't even know you had.
A whole new avalanche of information just came crashing down. I mean, could the anvil metaphor be any more perfect for Looney Tunes? That was the moment I realized this project had completely changed.
So at this point, yeah, it was pretty obvious. The original plan was garbage. The revised plan was garbage. This wasn't a part of a bigger project anymore. This was the project. And to do it right, I had to just toss out the old plan and start fresh. So to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, this was the original plan. Part 5 was just going to be theatrical cartoons. That's it. Simple, one part, done. Then, once I realized Warner Bros. Was this huge beast, I bumped it up to 2 parts. 2 dedicated parts just for Warner Bros. Surely that would be enough, right? Yeah, still not enough. Not even close. Which brings us to this. Part 5 has basically become a whole series inside of this series. It's the only way to break this down into chunks that actually make sense.
The single, small section I had planned for Warner Bros. Cartoons has now been expanded into 8 separate, distinct parts.
Yes.
That is how deep this rabbit hole actually goes.
So here's how it's all going to work. The original Part 5 is now becoming its own little mini-series. It's going to be divided into subsets. We have this introduction right now, and then it's going to be Part 5.1, Part 5.2, all the way up to... Honestly, it's the only way to present all this fascinating history in a way that's manageable and, won't make our brains melt.
It really respects the depth of the information without just throwing it all at you at once, which lets us all appreciate it so much more.
So the project kind of has a new identity now. It's become this blend of 2 different things. It's the Gen X kid fondly remembering watching these cartoons on TV, and it's also the amateur historian digging up all their fascinating hidden secrets.
So really, that's the big takeaway here, isn't it? A project that started as just a fond look back at some childhood TV shows, completely transformed, step by fascinating step, into this deep, passionate, historical exploration.
Okay, let's get into it. We're going to talk about something really cool. How the golden age of animation, all those classic cartoons made for movie theaters, got a second life and found a whole new generation of fans on afternoon TV. Before shows like He-Man and Transformers took over, the afternoons were ruled by a totally different kind of cartoon.
A cartoon made decades before you were even born. It was this weird, shared experience for a whole generation. Instead of brand new first-run shows, the main event was these massive, syndicated bundles of classic theatrical shorts. We're talking cartoons originally made for the movie theaters back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. While the big networks saved all their new stuff for Saturday mornings, weekday afternoons on the indie stations were basically a time machine.
These cartoons, your Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry, they were never, ever intended for television. Back in the 30s and 40s, when you went to the movies, the whole experience was different.
Right, it wasn't just one movie.
No. You'd see a newsreel, maybe a travelogue, a serial chapter of like Flash Gordon, and a cartoon.
So they were designed to be seen by adults and kids together in a theater on a massive screen. They were literally designed to play right before a movie like Casablanca.
Correct. But by the time the late 70s rolled around, that whole model was dead. Movie theaters had stopped showing shorts. So you had these studios sitting on these massive libraries of film that were just dormant. And the TV stations realized they could buy these packages of shorts, hundreds of them at a time, and just run them back to back to fill an hour.
It's basically the ultimate recycling program.
It is. And the sheer volume of content available was staggering. The source just lists them out. You had the big studios, Warner Bros., MGM, Universal, 20th Century Fox, Paramount, United Artists, Columbia.
It was a buffet. It wasn't just one flavor of cartoon. And I remember the logos. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew that Roaring Lion meant Tom and Jerry was coming up.
Yes.
And behind those studios, the production houses, you realize how much raw talent was being broadcast. Leon Schlesinger harmonizing, Walter Lantz, Terry Toons, Fleischer.
DePatie Freelang, UPA.
I remember seeing a Walter Lantz production on the screen. I had no idea who Walter Lantz was, but I knew if I saw that name, I was probably about to get Woody Woodpecker or Chilly Willy.
It became this weird kind of brand recognition for kids. You learned to associate Terry Toons with Mighty Mouse or Heckle and Jekyll. You associated Fleischer with the scratchy, weird New York look of Popeye or Betty Boop.
But it was all totally decontextualized. You didn't know these are competing studios from different decades. You just knew the logos.
Exactly. You just knew Popeye.
But wait, we just listed basically every major Hollywood studio, except for one. There's a glaring omission in that weekday afternoon lineup. A huge one.
It is the dog that didn't bark. Or, I guess, the mouse that didn't squeak.
The mouse. Disney.
Think about it. Go back to that UHF station in your mind, Channel 20, Channel 50, whatever it was. In that 4:00 p.m. slot, you almost never saw Mickey Mouse. You never saw Donald Duck or Goofy.
Now that you say it. Yeah. That is incredibly weird. I mean, I have a million sense memories of seeing Bugs Bunny, constant Woody Woodpecker. I even remember really obscure stuff like Deputy Dog.
Yeah.
But Mickey, he was a ghost on weekdays.
The author, Carlo DeSalvo, he points this out as a major anomaly. The single most famous, most influential name in the history of the medium is completely missing from that UHF afternoon lineup.
DeSalvo points this out explicitly in his text. He notes that Disney was always its own creature, operating on a completely different wavelength than the rest of Hollywood.
They really were playing their own game.
And this brings us to the core philosophical divide that shaped this entire era. Why was Disney missing from the afternoon recycling machine?
It comes down to a fundamental boardroom disagreement on how to define the art they had created decades earlier.
Okay, define the art how.
Disney viewed their library of theatrical shorts not as disposable content, but as foundational assets.
Assets, that's a big distinction.
Huge. And in a corporate philosophy, assets are not something you sell off by the pound to a local UHF station in Ohio.
No, you hold on to them.
Assets are something you fiercely, almost obsessively protect. Assets are something you control the context of.
Okay, let's look at how this high-level boardroom philosophy actually trickled down to the kid sitting on the shag carpet.
How it actually played out on TV.
Exactly. How did this divide translate to the screen? Because it created a starkly divided viewing reality.
Very stark.
Because Warner Bros. And MGM were perfectly happy to sell their content in bulk. Characters like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Tom and Jerry became absolutely ubiquitous.
They were everywhere.
You could turn on the TV and see them every weekday morning before school. You could see them every weekday afternoon after school. You could see them on Saturdays and Sundays.
Literally any time of day.
They became the standard default wallpaper of daily life for an entire generation.
They were inescapable. And because they were inescapable, they became deeply ingrained in the cultural lexicon of Generation X.
And everyone knew their catchphrases.
Everyone. But because Disney was fiercely protecting their assets, seeing a classic Disney cartoon was a completely different psychological experience.
Totally different.
DeSalvo specifically notes in his book that seeing a Donald Duck cartoon was considered a rare privilege.
A rare privilege.
Mm-hmm.
That phrase really stuck out to me because you couldn't just find Donald Duck on Channel 56 at 3:30 in the afternoon.
You couldn't. It just wasn't an option. Disney intentionally cordoned off their classic animation. They restricted it almost exclusively to primetime network television.
Oh, so back to the VHF dial.
Exactly, back to the big networks. You would only see those classic shorts on the official Disney anthology series that was airing on one of the big three networks that particular season.
Like The Wonderful World of Disney.
Yes, shows like that. Or during highly publicized, heavily promoted holiday television specials.
Right, the Christmas specials or Halloween specials.
They artificially artificially restricted the supply of their own characters to ensure that whenever a Disney cartoon was broadcast, it felt like a major cultural event. By choosing the path of extreme scarcity, Disney absolutely ceded the daily, intimate relationship to their rivals. Warner Bros. Became the reliable best friend who was always there when you got home.
The guy you hang out with every day.
Right. And Disney became the distant, wealthy relative you only saw on major holidays.
That's a perfect way to put it.
However, the psychological effect of that scarcity is profound. While Warner Bros. Claimed the daily headspace of the youth demographic, they also cheapened their own art.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, Bugs Bunny became associated with cheap UHF broadcasts. And, local car dealership commercials.
Oh, wow, yes.
It lost its prestige. Disney, by withholding their characters, maintained an aura of premium prestige.
They stayed above the fray.
They trained the audience to believe that a Disney animation was inherently more valuable than a Warner Bros. Animation simply because it was harder to access.
That is a massive trade-off.
Yeah.
They protected the perceived value of the vault, but they lost the afternoon playground.
They definitely gave up the playground.
Now, I do want to clarify something based on DeSalvo's text, because it wasn't a total 100% blackout.
No, there were exceptions.
Right. While Disney largely stayed out of the afternoon syndication game, and we have to remember, the Disney Channel didn't even launch until 1983.
And widespread cable television was still a massive luxury in the 70s anyway.
Exactly. But there were a few fascinating, very limited exceptions where the Disney Vault leaked to the local syndication market.
And those rare exceptions are incredibly telling.
They're so weird.
They show how Disney attempted to experiment with the lucrative syndication market without fully compromising their prestige strategy.
They wanted their cake and to eat it too.
They wanted the local television money, definitely, but they refused to just hand over the cartoons. The most prominent example of this tightrope walk was the original Mickey Mouse Club.
The black and white series from the 1950s, right?
Correct.
With Annette Funicello and the original Mouseketeers?
Exactly. This was actually a very successful staple of weekday afternoon television throughout the 1960s and early 1970s. The half-hour syndicated cut of the show was one of the only places a kid might catch one classic Disney cartoon per episode. But the key to understanding Disney's strategy here is the format of the show itself.
Right, because it wasn't just cartoons.
Not at all. When a local station bought the rights to air a half-hour episode of the Mickey Mouse Club, they weren't buying a block of cartoons. They were buying a live-action variety show for kids.
Oh, okay.
And Disney strictly mandated the pacing. They typically packaged exactly one classic Disney animated short per half-hour episode.
So it was a Trojan horse.
Basically.
They were dipping their toe into the syndication revenue stream, but they were rationing the actual animation.
Heavy rationing.
They were giving you one single cartoon, heavily guarded and wrapped inside a larger half-hour live-action show.
So you had to sit through all the singing and dancing just to get to Donald Duck.
But even that rationing didn't last forever. DeSalvo notes a very specific and somewhat abrupt end to that era of reruns.
Yes, he does.
The original Mickey Mouse Club was formally withdrawn from all wide distribution on January 14th, 1977.
January 14th, 1977. They just pulled the plug on the black and white reruns entirely.
Just locked them back in the vault.
And they did this to clear the runway for a brand new, highly calculated experiment.
Which was?
The new Mickey Mouse Club.
This is where the Disney boardroom strategy gets incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
And honestly, a little desperate.
It definitely shows them sweating a bit.
The new Mickey Mouse Club ran in first-run syndication from 1977 to 1979. Now, let's clarify first-run syndication because it's different from what we talked about before.
Right, it's a different economic model.
Earlier, local stations were buying old, recycled theater shorts. First-run syndication means a studio creates a brand new show specifically to sell directly to these local independent stations, bypassing the big national networks entirely.
Exactly. It's newly produced content, but aimed at the cheaper dials.
Disney saw that the 50s reruns have proven surprisingly popular, so they decided to modernize the entire franchise to sell to those same local stations.
They wanted to capture the contemporary late 70s audience, and the updates they made to the show were aggressively of their time.
Aggressively is the right word.
They were terrified of seeming outdated, so they replaced the classic traditional marching band theme song with a heavy disco-style re-recording of the Mickey Mouse March.
Oh, I can literally hear the funk bass line and the hi-hat cymbals in my head right now.
It's so groovy.
It is the most 1977 sound imaginable.
They also completely overhauled the visual aesthetic. Instead of the highly detailed, rustic artwork and clubhouse sets of the original 50s show, they utilized much brighter, simpler, almost neon-colored sets.
Very disco-era visual design.
And perhaps most significantly from a cultural standpoint, Disney specifically sought out a more ethnically diverse group of 12 new Mouseketeers.
Which was a big shift for them.
Huge shift.
It was a full, top-to-bottom 1970s rebranding. DeSalvo points out that while the live-action studio segments were new, many episodes would take existing live-action Disney films, chop them up into 5-minute cliffhanger segments, and serialize them across a week of episodes, like The Mystery of Rustler's Cave.
Right, dragging out the content to fill time.
And just like the 50s version, they would strictly portion out typically only one classic Disney cartoon per episode.
It was the exact same Trojan horse, just painted in brighter colors.
Right.
They were giving the audience a fresh, modern wrapper, but the actual animated content inside was still severely restricted. They still refused to just give the kids a solid half hour of Donald Duck.
Which is what everyone actually wanted.
Of course. And ultimately, that reluctance to provide what the audience actually wanted doomed the project. The 1970s revival only lasted for a couple of years before being canceled due to waning interest.
But that wasn't even their weirdest syndication experiment in the 70s.
Oh, not by a long shot.
If we are talking about desperate attempts to protect the vault while still making a buck, we have to talk about the Mouse Factory.
Ah, yes. The Mouse Factory is a remarkable anomaly in the Disney broadcast history. It ran briefly from 1972 to 1973. Much like the new Mickey Mouse Club, this was not a network show. It was a first-run syndicated series pitched directly to local stations.
The premise of this show absolutely breaks my brain. It sounds like a fever dream you would have after falling asleep with the TV on.
That's very strange.
Each episode was hosted by a different live-action celebrity guest. He lists names like Kurt Russell, John Astin from The Addams Family, and Jim Backus from Gilligan's Island.
It was a very bizarre intersection of classic Disney animation and 1970s celebrity culture. The internal structure of the show is incredibly rigid. Every single episode was built around a highly specific theme.
Like what?
You might have an episode dedicated entirely to space, or horses, or bullfighting.
So Jim Backus would come out, do some bits about bullfighting on a physical set, and then what? They would just play a cartoon.
Yes, but specifically, the celebrity host would introduce classic Disney shorts and various film clips that had been meticulously selected from the vault to match that day's exact theme.
Again, we see the Michelin star restaurant mentality. Total obsessive curation.
Always.
The cartoon isn't just playing randomly because the local station programmer needed to kill 7 minutes before a commercial break. The cartoon is being presented within an educational or thematic framework, introduced by an established Hollywood host. It is a guided, museum-style tour of the Disney Vault.
That is the perfect way to describe it. But despite the celebrity power and the massive Disney library, it failed to resonate. It only lasted for 43 episodes over 2 seasons before the ratings forced its cancellation.
So, when DeSalvo synthesizes all of this data for his 1979 to 1983 window, the conclusion is stark. Despite these minor, short-lived syndicated exceptions, Disney is effectively a ghost on the afternoon local stations.
Barely there at all.
There's an extreme dearth of their material compared to the absolute tsunami of content from everyone else.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of corporate strategy, it proves how fiercely Disney was holding the line on their asset philosophy.
They were holding the line hard.
Rather than just sell a cheap package of Donald Duck shorts to a local station to play on a loop like Warner Bros. Did, Disney spent massive amounts of money hiring Jonathan Winters, building elaborate sets, and writing scripts just to build a framing device around a handful of clips.
The overhead must have been crazy.
They were willing to try incredibly convoluted, ultimately unsuccessful television formats just to avoid the perceived cheapness of simply dumping their content.
And it was unsuccessful. Which brings us to the ultimate showdown of these two strategies. DeSalvo's source material focuses our attention strictly on a very specific, pivotal window of time.
Right, let's get into the timeline.
From his earliest television memories in 1979, right up to the brink of the industry revolution in 1983.
That 4-year window is the prime era of the UHF afternoon landscape we are analyzing. This is the period right before the entire television industry shifted its paradigm.
And during this 1979 to 1983 window, the contrast between the studios could not be starker.
9-day.
You have the content studios, Warner Bros., MGM, Universal, absolutely flooding the market. They are dumping thousands of their theatrical libraries onto local stations.
It's just a fire hose of cartoons.
And on the other side, you have Disney executing what DeSalvo calls their strictly limited gold standard strategy.
There was an extreme, deliberate dearth of Disney product in local syndication.
It was a textbook case of manufactured artificial scarcity. Because a child couldn't see Donald Duck every day at 3:30 p.m., the moment a Disney special aired on a Sunday night on NBC, it became destination viewing.
It demanded your undivided attention in a way that a daily rerun of Woody Woodpecker simply could not.
Because Woody was always there.
Right. Popeye was cheap fast food. It was always there, it was satisfying, but it wasn't special.
You don't get excited for the fast food you eat every day.
But Disney was a steak dinner at a fancy restaurant. By withholding their product, Disney successfully trained an entire generation to associate their brand name with rarity, prestige, and event-level importance.
It is a brilliant psychological manipulation, even if it meant sacrificing the afternoon ratings.
It played the long game.
But because Disney intentionally vacated that afternoon time slot, they left a massive, gaping void in the daily lives of children.
A huge vacuum.
And that void was filled by what truly became the absolute pinnacle of the era. The cartoons that ultimately ruled the Generation X afternoons. It's an overwhelming volume of art. And you have to remember, almost none of this was designed for television.
None of it.
These were created to be shown on massive movie theater screens, preceding feature films for adult audiences. Now they are downsized, color-shifted, chopped up, and beamed into living rooms to entertain kids who had just finished a long day of learning multiplication tables. It is an incredible, almost accidental journey for a piece of art to take. From a silver screen adult comedy to a shag carpet childhood babysitter.
A total accident of commerce.
But here's the thing. DeSalvo's text mentions something very specific multiple times, and it is an idea we haven't fully explored yet because it sits just outside the window we discussed.
The 1983 shift.
Yes. He mentions that an absolute cartoon syndication revolution occurred in the year 1983. And that revolution changed the entire paradigm of television animation.
It flipped everything upside down.
It fundamentally broke the old model and caused even Disney to completely rethink their strategy of scarcity.
1983 represents a massive earthquake in the industry.
The 30-minute toy commercial was born.
Exactly. This birthed the era of shows like He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and later G.I. Joe and Transformers.
Okay, so that's a totally different thing.
These were not recycled theatrical shorts. These were first-run syndication shows built from scratch specifically for the weekday afternoon market.
Exactly. The era of the recycled cinematic masterpiece was over.
It was a completely new game.
It changes how you view everything that came after. Because when you picture that kid rushing through the front door, dropping that heavy backpack and turning the clunky dial on the television set, you realize they weren't just picking a cartoon to watch with their snack.
No, they were participating in history.
They were tuning in to the very final echoes of Hollywood's golden age, right before the channel changed forever.
So, with Disney set aside for now, and with our new 8-part roadmap for Warner Bros. All laid out, we can finally get ready for the adventure ahead. And hey, don't you worry, we are absolutely going to get to all the other classic cartoons, I promise. We've got MGM's Tom and Jerry, Paramount's Popeye, Woody Woodpecker from Universal. They're all waiting for their turn. But first, we have a very, very important rabbit to follow.
So now it's time to start part 5 in earnest.
The only question left is, are you ready to see just how deep this thing really goes? I really hope you'll join me for what turned out to be a totally unexpected and fascinating adventure into animation history.
Up next, we begin our very first deep dive, Warner Bros. Theatrical Cartoons, Part 5.1. Let's get started.